I didn't even want the room painted. Not really. It was one of those impulse decisions you make when you're lonely, and you think maybe changing the color of your walls will somehow shift the atmosphere around your life. A pale blue, I told myself. Calm, cool, detached. Everything I wasn't feeling lately. I hired him because my neighbor recommended him. Said he was quiet, fast, didn't talk much, just did the job. And for some reason that sounded perfect. I didn't want small talk. I didn't want attention. I wanted silence and a fresh coat of something that didn't remind me of my ex. He arrived early. Too early. I was still in my robe, hair in a clip, coffee half drunk on the kitchen counter. I opened the door expecting someone older, more seasoned. But he was young. Not boyish young, but dangerous young. Like he hadn't been broken yet. Maybe 27. Maybe 29. Clean white t-shirt. Dark jeans with a few faded paint stains. His eyes were focused but unreadable. He didn't smile. Just nodded once, stepped inside, and carried his brushes like a priest walking into church. I watched him move with a kind of effortless precision. He didn't ask questions. Just opened the cans, stirred the paint, laid the tarp. And then he stepped into the room, shut the door behind him and started working. I wasn't expecting the sound. The long, slow drag of the roller against the wall. It was oddly rhythmic, almost hypnotic. I found myself walking past the door again. And again. Until finally I cracked it open just a little, just enough to see him working. That's when it happened. He turned just slightly to reach for the tray. And I saw the curve of his neck as his shirt pulled down. The tendons shifting like something alive under skin. There was a smear of white near his collarbone. And I swear in that moment I forgot the name of the color we picked. My breath hitched. I should have closed the door. Should have walked away. But instead I leaned against the frame and watched his hands move over the wall, slow and steady, every stroke like a quiet confession. The room was changing, but so was something in me. And when he finally turned around and caught me watching, his eyes didn't widen. He didn't look surprised. He looked aware. Like he'd known I'd be there all along. I pretended I was just passing by. "Oh, sorry," I mumbled, stepping back like I hadn't been caught devouring him with my eyes. Didn't mean to interrupt. He didn't say anything. Just looked at me for a second too long, the kind of pause that leaves an imprint. Then he nodded just once and went back to painting. But the silence was different now. It wasn't just quiet, it was charged. The room felt warmer. Thicker somehow, like the air between us had weight. I went to the kitchen, poured myself another cup of coffee I didn't want, just for something to do. My heart was ticking too fast, and I hated that I was acting like a teenager with a crush. I was a grown woman. I had responsibilities, routines. I'd been married. I'd handled grief and heartbreak and taxes. So why did the curve of a stranger's neck make my chest feel like it was caving in? I waited 15 minutes before walking past the room again. This time the door was ajar. This time he spoke. "You don't like the color," he said without turning around. I froze. His voice was deep, quiet, almost soft. Like velvet that had been dragged through smoke. "I never said that," I replied, but it came out too quick, too defensive. He turned slowly, roller still in hand, and faced me. "You keep looking at the wall," he said, eyes meeting mine. "But your face doesn't follow the paint." That stopped me cold. My mouth opened but nothing came out. 'Cause he was right. I hadn't been looking at the wall. Not once. I was looking at his arms, his shoulders, the way his jeans clung low on his hips when he stretched. I was watching his breath rise and fall under his shirt, the flecks of his fingers against the roller, the sweat beginning to bloom near his collar. I wanted to lie, say something flippant, but I couldn't. Instead, I just stood there, one hand on the doorframe, and let the silence wrap around us like something unspeakable. And then he did something I didn't expect. He dipped the roller again, turned back to the wall, and without another word, he wrote something with the paint. Letters. A name. A number. And then a date. I didn't move. Couldn't move. Because in that moment, I realized he wasn't just painting walls. He was leaving something behind. Something I wasn't sure I was ready to read. I told myself not to look. It was probably a joke. A tease. A way to mess with the bored woman who kept hovering in the hallway, like she didn't have her own life to live. But I looked anyway. His handwriting was sharp, confident, unapologetically male. The kind of writing that made you wonder what else those hands could do with such certainty. I read the name first. Leo. Then a phone number, inked not with a pen, but with a careful swipe of pale blue paint. The digits were clean, deliberate, like he'd painted them 1,000 times in his head before letting them bleed onto my wall. And the date? It wasn't today's. It was 3 days from now. A Saturday. My breath caught in my throat. He was still facing the wall, pretending to work, but I knew he was listening. Every quiet breath I took, every heartbeat thudding out of rhythm in my chest, he could probably hear all of it. Feel it. What's happening on Saturday? I asked, and I hated how soft my voice sounded, like I'd forgotten how to speak without giving something away. He didn't turn around, just kept painting. That's when the color will dry, he said. And maybe by then you'll know what you want. My mouth went dry, because somehow that one sentence stripped me more than any look ever could. I wanted to tell him to leave, to wipe the number off the wall, to pretend this didn't just open something raw and breathless inside me. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped into the room, and it was like crossing into another atmosphere. The light felt different here. Dimmer, quieter, more aware. He was just a few feet away, but in that moment it felt like he was everywhere. I could smell the paint, sharp and fresh, but beneath it I smelled something else, him. Skin and sweat and something clean like soap and sun and muscle memory. I don't usually, I started. I know, he said. His voice was closer now. I hadn't seen him move, but somehow the space between us had vanished. Or maybe it had never really been there at all. I looked at him. Really looked. There was a tiny smear of blue near the corner of his mouth, like the color had kissed him by accident. And I wanted more than anything to be that careless. You should finish the wall, I said, barely above a whisper. He looked down at the roller in his hand, then back at me. I will, he said. But not today. And then he walked out, quiet, slow, like he knew every step he took was going to echo in my chest long after he was gone. I stood there, alone in a room that wasn't quite blue, with a name and number painted onto the wall of a life I wasn't sure I recognized anymore. And somehow I didn't want to paint over it. I didn't touch the paint. For 3 days I kept the door shut. Not out of indifference but reverence. Like that room had become something sacred. Something alive. I couldn't bring myself to open the window. I wanted the scent of him to linger in the air, fresh paint and skin and suggestion. I walked past that door like someone tiptoeing around a sleeping secret. I'd pause, hand on the knob, pulse fluttering like it might answer before I could. Saturday came too quickly. I sat at the kitchen table with my phone in hand. His number burned into my mind. I must have typed it out 10 times, only to delete it before hitting call. I felt like a teenager again. Or maybe something worse, someone craving more than touch. Someone starving for the heat behind a look. The silence behind a sentence. At 4:17 p.m. I got a message. Room's dry. You ready? That's all it said. No name, no emoji, no hesitation. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened the door. And there he was. He hadn't knocked. He hadn't waited. He was standing inside the room like he'd never left, running his fingertips across the wall, like he was feeling for something invisible. Like the paint held more than color, like it remembered our silence. His eyes met mine and the air between us snapped taut. You left the number, I said, as if he didn't know. He nodded. You left the door. I didn't know what he meant at first, but then I realized I had. Unlocked. Unlatched. Not just the room, but something inside me I'd been keeping sealed for too long. I don't do things like this, I whispered. He stepped closer. Me neither. And maybe that's why it felt so electric, because we were both standing in unfamiliar territory, pulled by something wordless and trembling. I watched his hand drift toward mine. Not fast. Not eager. Just steady, like he was asking without asking. And when his fingers brushed mine, barely, lightly, achingly, I felt it everywhere. In my knees. My throat. The hollow just beneath my ribs. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to explain. He moved in closer, the heat of his body meeting the coolness of mine, and I felt myself leaning, just slightly, like a page folding in the middle of a breath. I didn't know what we were doing. I didn't know what this was. But I knew the color on the wall would never dry the same way again. He didn't kiss me. Not at first. He just stood close. So close I could feel the warmth rolling off his skin like sunlight through a window you never meant to open. His fingers stayed near mine, not gripping, not holding, just there. And somehow that felt louder than anything he could have said. The room had become something else entirely. It wasn't just where walls met corners. It was where breath hung, unspoken, between two people trying not to fall into each other too fast. I looked up at him and he looked down at me. And for a second neither of us moved. Then his hand rose. Slowly. Like a tide climbing skin. He brushed a strand of hair from my face, his knuckles grazing my cheek. It wasn't a caress, it was something deeper. A question. A tremor. And I felt my whole body answer without a sound. I stepped into him. It was instinct. It was gravity. It was that wild pull you only feel once in your life when someone touches you without touching you. Our foreheads almost met. His breath kissed the edge of my jaw. And still he didn't kiss me. Instead he whispered, "You smell like morning." And I swear that one sentence undid me. I closed my eyes not because I was afraid, but because I needed to feel it all without distraction. The rise and fall of his chest. The heat collecting between us. The fluttering ache in my stomach that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with anticipation. When his lips finally brushed mine, it wasn't a kiss. It was a promise. Soft. Patient. Like he was tasting the moment before daring to devour it. My hands found his shirt, fingers curling into fabric. I didn't even realize I'd done it. Just that I needed something to hold on to before the floor disappeared. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Every touch was louder than words. The walls around us, the ones he had painted, felt like they were leaning in, watching, memorizing us. And when his mouth deepened against mine, when my body pressed against his with the quiet hunger of someone waking from a long winter, I knew. This wasn't about a room. It wasn't about a name on the wall. It was about what we'd both left behind, and what we were about to find in each other. We didn't rush. It was slow, achingly slow. Every movement deliberate. Every pause heavier than speech. His hands moved like he was learning me through touch. Like each inch of skin held a story he didn't want to rush through. I felt him trail along my arms, across my shoulders, down my back. Each pass awakening something quiet and electric just beneath my surface. I breathed differently around him. Like the air was thicker, fuller, charged. He leaned in, pressing his forehead to mine again, eyes closed. We were standing still, but everything inside me was trembling. My pulse fluttered against my throat and I knew he could feel it. His hand rested there gently, his thumb catching every beat. "I don't know what this is," I whispered, the truth trembling out of me. "Me neither," he murmured. And yet we stayed. I let him guide me down to the tarp-covered floor. The paint cans pushed aside, the drop cloth cool against my skin. The same floor he'd been working on days ago was now the stage for something far less practical, far more human. He kissed me again. Deeper now, with that slow burning certainty. Like he'd been waiting, not for permission, but for gravity to do what it always does. Pull one body into another. I arched into him as his fingers slid beneath the hem of my shirt. There was reverence in his touch, like I wasn't just a body but a place. A place he wanted to be careful with, a place to return to. And I melted. Every nerve, every breath, every unspoken ache I'd buried beneath routines and quiet dinners and lonely sheets. It all rose to the surface under him. I felt seen. Not just looked at. Seen. My hands found his back, the muscles shifting beneath his skin like waves under moonlight. I gripped him, not out of need but out of surrender. I didn't want to hold on. I wanted to be held. His mouth drifted lower, finding the hollow between my shoulder and collarbone. He lingered there, breathing me in. I could feel his lips part against my skin, feel the pause before every touch, like he was listening to what my body couldn't say out loud. And I said everything without a word. We moved in rhythm, not fast, not frantic, but deep and slow and full of heat. And in that room, with the scent of drying paint and the echo of breath, something between us settled. It didn't matter what we were. In that moment, we just were. I don't know how long we stayed there. Time blurred, folded between breaths, between the hush of skin against skin. The light outside shifted, dimmed, casting soft shadows that moved across the room like slow waves. We lay on the drop cloth, tangled in silence, the paint still fresh on the walls and on us. A smudge of blue on my shoulder. A faint streak along his jaw. It didn't feel messy, it felt marked. Like this moment had claimed us in a language only the body could speak. He traced circles on my stomach with the tips of his fingers, slow and absent-minded. Not because he was trying to seduce me, he already had. This was something else. Something quieter. Intimate in the way silence can be when it's shared. I tilted my head, watching him in the fading light. His eyes were open, unfocused. He looked younger now. Less sharp. Less silent. "You always paint like that?" I asked softly. He smiled. Not the full kind, but just enough that I saw something shift at the corner of his mouth. "Only when the room needs it." I laughed under my breath. "And how do you know what a room needs?" His fingers paused. "I don't," he said. "But I know when it wants more than paint." The way he said it made something tighten in my chest. Because he wasn't just talking about the room. He sat up slowly, pulling his shirt back on, muscles stretching beneath fabric in a way that made me bite back the urge to reach for him again. He looked around the space, eyes scanning the walls, the corners, the air. "Looks different now," he murmured. I followed his gaze. It did. Not because of the color, but because of the memory etched into every inch of it now. "Do you do this often?" I asked, unsure why the question came out as brittle as it did. He didn't answer right away. "No," he said finally. "I don't stay." That hit harder than I expected. He stood, reached for his brush, and turned toward the name and number he had left on the wall. I thought he might paint over it. He didn't. Instead, he dipped his brush again, same color, same motion, and added one more word beneath the date. "If." Just that. One word. If. It hung there, open and unfinished. Like a dare. Like an invitation. Like the space between what we feel and what we're brave enough to say. I stood there long after he was gone. The room smelled of him and paint and something almost holy, like something had ended and begun in the same breath. He hadn't said goodbye. He hadn't needed to. The word he left behind, "if," felt more intimate than any confession. 3 letters. Infinite meanings. If you call. If you want more. If you're brave enough to let this happen again. I stared at the wall like it might answer. Like it might whisper the version of my life I hadn't yet dared to live. Because the truth is, I'd forgotten what it felt like to be wanted without explanation. To be touched like a prayer. To be seen in my stillness and heard in my silence. He gave me all of that in a single afternoon. But it wasn't just desire he left me with. It was choice. I could paint over the wall. Cover his number. Erase the question. Or I could leave it. Untouched, unhidden. Like a map back to the version of myself that came alive in his hands. I walked out of the room and closed the door gently behind me. I didn't call him that night. But I didn't paint over it either. I let it stay. Because sometimes the most honest moments in our lives aren't loud. They're soft. They're whispered. And they leave you breathless.